exactly. Like if Kendall Jenner was to be like, I want to be involved in this whiskey project, I'd be like, like, okay, like
Yeah, 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 yeah,
that
yeah.
could be a really good thing, you know.
And Nikki Sturgeon would be over the fucking moon, you know.
They could be shaking hands, Nikki Sturgeon, Kendall Jenner on the
My
front of
close friend Kendall Jenner.
on the front of the bottle. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That would be hilarious,
that would be
actually.
hilarious. Yeah.
Leading on from that, my topic is actually, I guess it's in a similar vein. It's not quite cancel culture, but it's something it's been circulating around the same circles, I would say. Now, I've seen a lot of my topic that I'm about to speak about on Twitter over the last few years. And until I researched this topic, maybe over the last week or so,
Mhm.
I wasn't even fully aware of what it was. I had a reasonable idea, but I wasn't entirely sure. But basically, over the last couple of weeks, the Kardashians have been back at it again.
Okay.
Kendall Jenner has recently been starting up this tequila business. She's trying to open up this drinks company. I think it's called 818, and it's basically a tequila brand
Okay.
of alcohol that she's trying to release in the US. So she's received a bit of backlash for this over the last little while for this ad campaign that she's put out because apparently she's culturally appropriating Mexico by selling tequila and the way that she depicts herself in these adverts that she's in.
Okay.
So before we talk about Kendall Jenner and what cultural appropriation is, what do you think it is at the moment? What are your thoughts on it in its
Mm.
current state? Do you even know what it is?
I mean, aware of it. I'm aware of what it is, but I don't. To be honest with you, I don't understand why it's bad. Actually, like from what I seem to understand, I guess I would phrase cultural awareness as cultural appropriation. Sorry, as the opposite of cultural awareness. Really, it's like when you
Yes.
steal things from other people's culture without, I guess, an awareness of why you're doing it, or maybe taking things out of context, I suppose. But to me, when I see most people talk about cultural appropriation, it seems to be people getting angry at other people or embracing an aspect of another person's culture. For instance, an English person wearing what's it called? Like the traditional Indian dress. It's like all colorful and stuff like that. I've
Mm.
seen like people get angry for people who wear that because that's considered cultural appropriation. As I say, I don't actually understand the negativity about it, but
Yeah, so I'm sort of the same boat. I see a lot of people talking about cultural appropriation, and I was of the opinion that the vast public perception of what cultural appropriation
mhm,
is much broader than what it actually is. I think people apply the term cultural appropriation to a lot of things that actually aren't cultural appropriation, and
right,
they don't really know
okay,
what it is. So before this week, I'd only ever really seen it on things like the American football team, the Washington Redskins, how their name was like culturally appropriating the Native Americans, and I'd seen things about people wearing costumes on Halloween. Like you see a lot
yeah,
of like
yeah,
blackface, you see a lot of people that are wearing like Native American like costumes, and it's like that's
yeah, like
cultural
Red Indian,
appropriation.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So that seems like it's based in a little bit of insensitivity. Now, I would probably agree that, for example, if you're a German, I wouldn't wear like a Jewish costume on Halloween or something like that. Or if you're an American, I wouldn't wear like a Native American costume because that's a bit insensitive. You're like
yes,
that seems a bit insensitive. But we talk about cultural appropriation, and I want to sort of make sure that that's very different from like cultural mixing and cultural appreciation. So how do you think those two are different?
So I guess it kind of goes back to that very first thing that when I just misspoke there. I suppose that the problem, I guess, the problem people have is by embracing aspects of another person's culture with no awareness of why they're doing it. Like someone that sees like a Japanese geisha girl, and like just thinks that that looks really pretty, and like I'm going to buy a bunch of those, but doesn't isn't aware of like the customs and the practices and the associated culture with that type of dress or that type of practice or customs. I guess I assume that it's basically when people take things out of context and like just like, oh, that's very pretty, I'll wear that, and without having an awareness of it. But like even still, to me, that doesn't seem actually super negative,
It
actually.
also seems to be overwhelmingly from dominant race groups or ethnicities
Oh,
to
right,
minorities as well. That seems to be a very big one. Now, I
right.
wasn't exactly sure if that had to be something about cultural appropriation. I wasn't sure if that was part of the definition or anything like that. But that's what it always seems to be in the examples that I see anyway. It's always like a white person that's doing something that appropriates a minority ethnicity in the
Right.
place that they are from,
Right.
or
Okay.
somebody
Okay.
else's culture across the world, or something like that.
That makes
So
sense.
to bring it all back, I think that the successful conversations that we've had on this show have all been like a deep dive into the serious issues. You know, we talk
Hmm.
about the LGBTQ plus backlash, we talk about the super straight issue, we talk about gun control. We looked at all these issues on like a base level.
Hmm.
So I want to do that again here, and I want to really try and get to the heart of the issue before we even make a comment on what Kendall Jenner has done this week
Okay.
with her
Yeah.
drinks
Okay.
company.
Hmm.
So when we think about cultural acceptance and mixing and appreciation, we really have to talk about the foundations of like culture itself, because basically, since people have been able to travel, there's been like mixture of culture, right? When you think
Right.
about ever since people have been walking, there's been mixtures of culture. So if you think about even like back centuries ago, thousands and thousands of years ago, when it was like tribal people, any group of people that talks to a different group of people is mixing culture in some way, shape, or form, right?
Hmm. That makes sense.
So if you look back over history, this has happened like successfully in some ways and unsuccessfully in others.
Okay.
So I had a little bit of a look into how cultures mix and how they interact when they come together. And basically, it
Okay.
happens in like a couple of ways. When cultures come together and they mix sort of naturally, and maybe not forced, when it happens like naturally with immigration and stuff like that, it's actually called acculturation, which can happen through various methods such as segregation, integration, assimilation, or something called marginalizing.
Okay.
So segregation is when so for example, if a culture is to come into like a group of immigrants, say for example, there's a group of Muslim immigrants and they come into Britain, and then a mosque pops up. That's
Hmm.
segregation, where they get their own space for like a culture where they get their own space to do
So
things,
that happened in
and
that
it's
happened in Palestine.
yeah, and it's kind of separate from the culture that already exists there.
Right. Right. Got you.
You also get integration and assimilation, which is like a sort of meshing of the two cultures. So you get like mixed race couples and stuff like that, and then elements of both culture will go forward, and then it'll create this new culture.
Ah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the one that is this marginalised Uring is when the people that come actually reject both their own culture and the culture that's there. So I'm not really sure what situation that applies to. That seems very odd to me. But it's another way in which cultures can sort of mix where
Evolve.
someone just rejects the two of them.
Interesting. Okay.
Now that's like the beneficial ways of like natural acculturation. Now you also get something else which is called colonization, which
Mm.
is sort of when, to dumb it down a little bit, basically it's when a powerful entity comes in and imposes its culture on like another. So it's basically, the
The
idea
British
is
Empire.
powerful white man comes in and takes over the Native American space, sort of thing,
Yeah.
where
Okay.
they impose their culture normally by force or by some sort of dominant means, and it's normally for like economic growth as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the kind of methods of like cultures mixing and coming together. Colonization is obviously quite a bad one because it's someone coming in by force and forcing their way through things. Now, the actual definition of cultural appropriation, which I've got from Oxford Languages Online, I'm assuming this is a feasible source.
Right. Yeah.
I think it is. It says, it's Oxford.
No.
It's
Yeah.
like,
It is. It is. Yes.
so the definition of cultural appropriation is the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another, and typically more dominant people or society. So it seems to be when someone takes another culture, and it's typically when a majority people takes from a minority people,
Okay.
and they don't either acknowledge the culture or they somehow represent it in an inappropriate way. So that kind of comes back to the sort of Halloween thing I was just saying, where white people would use the Native American garbs, and it's like that's kind of inappropriate because their culture was that was like colonization when the white man kind of came across to America, and it was the culture was almost imposed upon them.
Yeah, yeah, uh-huh,
I mean,
uh-huh.
I'm talking about if a German at a party was to wear a Jewish garb, it'd be like, okay, that's quite clearly insensitive, and that's kind of inappropriate because of the history that's there, if you know what I
Mhm.
mean. So, does that sort of align with what you thought cultural appropriation was?
I have to clarify something because I think I'm a little bit confused. So we've got two concepts here. We're talking about like the macro scale and the the micro scale. Okay, so we're talking about cultures in terms of bodies. Cultures, the British culture, the Southern African culture, the Native Indian culture. I'm confused how we're reconciling this with one person wearing like ceremonial garb from a different country. Like, how are these things? I don't quite understand. I understand what you're saying about like cultures merging, because in a couple generations you might not know that it was originally two cultures, whereas in like a city you might have like there's Chinatown, there's like that's the Jewish quarter,
Yep.
so like that, and that's the example of where cultures do grow up but stay isolated. So I guess that would be yeah, one of these isolated pockets. So like I'm understanding like culture on this like larger scale. How does that tie in with, for instance, someone wearing a costume inappropriately?
So I think there are ways in which people can go about adopting other cultures appropriately. I think when it comes to people coming into the country, I think there's like a discussion to be had about how it works sort of moving forward. When you go somewhere else, there's like an integration period where like you kind of maybe you want to bring your own culture, but you also have to adhere to the cultures that are there.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's an element where people can also take from other cultures and be culturally appreciative of it, and they can use other cultures to like mesh together and
Mm-hmm.
then make new cultures. And that's something
Yeah.
that people do and they work together, and that happens all the time. You see
Yeah.
cultures mesh together, especially now when it's so easy to travel.
Yeah. We've got such a transient world that there are a mixing of cultures on a scale we've never seen before.
Yeah, so there's a way to do cultural mixing, and there's a way to do acculturation that's kind of appropriate and that's well understood.
Got
But
you.
cultural appropriation is this way where you're sort of unacknowledging the culture that you're taking from, or you're taking from something that's kind of it's a bit inappropriate for you to do so, and it's almost like cultural mixing. It's viewed as a form of colonization where you sort of take something and you can just do what you want with it, sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I do, because I do see what you mean, because like those list of different types of um cultural mixing which you described at the beginning, they all sounded natural and positive.
Yep.
Well, debatably positive, but like that's the natural evolution of things and how human beings tend to cluster and stuff like that. That's unrealistic. And yes, definitely colonization, it does seem like an aggressive force of like oppression, and like culture is being squelched. For instance, the easy example we can obviously talk about, because it was the most recent culture that ended up going squashing around the rest of them, was the British culture. When they went to, for instance, like African nations or like Asian countries and set up, British facilities and like started making people speak English, and it became very British centric. So I get that how in that scenario we're talking about like an oppressive force. See, that's like, we're not talking about, when we're talking about colonization, it doesn't seem to me that we're talking about a misuse of culture in terms of using another culture. We're talking about suppressing a culture.
It's almost like you're taking something that is like sacred to someone else. It's like their customs, their practices, and you're taking it and you're using it as a part of your culture, but you're not really acknowledging where it came from. You're just sort of taking it away from them, and you're saying, I'm deciding what to do with this now. This is like something that I've adopted into my culture. I'm like taking this thing that's sort of like sacred to you,
Hmm.
and I'm taking it and I'm deciding what to do with it. Now, to be clear, I'm not sure where the line is drawn, whether this is like totally not okay or whether this is something where it's okay in some contexts. I'm not exactly sure. I
Hmm.
just wanted to differentiate the two things. when it came
Yeah.
to
Well,
cultures
okay,
mixing
sure.
appropriately and this cultural appropriation, which seems to be when cultures mix inappropriately. That seems to be the difference for me.
I have one more question then on this topic of the differences between like these natural cultural mixing, cultural appropriation. I'm confused to see how this aspect of colonization involves taking culture. Because like from my understanding, for instance, like when the Americans went to America, it didn't seem to me that they picked up any of the native Indian culture. They just stamped it out
Yeah,
and put their own culture in place. So to me, maybe actually, I might be semantic here, but it doesn't seem like we're talking about misusing culture. It seems we're talking about abusing culture.
yeah. So colonization is sort of when you come and you impose your culture onto someone else. So cultural appropriation is seen as a form of this almost, where you're coming, you're doing this.
Right.
It's not. I don't think it's specifically. It's not colonialism in itself, but
Got you.
it's seen as a sort of a form of that. The people that speak out against cultural appropriation just label it as colonialism, sort of thing.
Got
They
you.
totally just take it as a form of that, which I guess it sort of is in a way
I
when
can
you're
kind of
taking
see.
away the sacred things from them, and you're sort of saying it's open to anyone, and it's almost like it's not got the same value anymore. You know, you're kind
It
of
does devalue, doesn't it?
removing it a little bit. You know, you're taking it away from someone else. So I can see where they're coming from with that statement.
I get, yeah, no, you're right. I see it now. That's been cleared up for me.
So, from what I've seen, the public perception of what cultural appropriation is far too broad,
Yeah, it's
which
not
is
that.
what I kind of originally thought when I was seeing this, because it seems to be plastered all over Twitter when anything along these lines sort of happen. Even like cultural appreciation seems to be sort of grouped into that.
Mm.
So I've seen things like recently, like just to go back to the Kardashians again, I've seen Kim Kardashian got a lot of backlash because she had dreadlocks at like a red carpet event, and that's supposedly culturally appropriating black people because they wear dreadlocks. And I've seen things online that people are like, you shouldn't even be like cooking and consuming foods that are from like other cultures because that's you sort of culturally appropriating them if it's not cooked. For example, if you
Right,
have
right.
fajitas, not cooked by a Mexican, so it's a cultural appropriation.
Got you.
So
Okay.
I kind of wanted to make it clear what is meant by inappropriate adoption of something because that can kind of go either way. I don't really think it's necessarily cultural appropriation for you to enjoy the things that other cultures have. You know, you can appreciate them without appropriating them, sort of thing.
So that I think that's probably a point worth questioning there. Like, how do you differentiate between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation?
So it's not a clear boundary, I think.
Yeah.
So we talk about the differences between appropriation and appreciation. We talk about things from other cultures. I think the line for me might be drawn when you exploit another culture for your own gain, for your own selfish gain, particularly. And it's kind of, it comes around to selling things almost because you know,
Right.
when I just spoke about Kim Kardashian wearing dreadlocks and people consuming food from other cultures, you don't gain anything out of that. You know, like if I was to have fajitas one night or I was to have Italian and I was to eat that in my house, that's not me. That's just me appreciating other culture and that culture's been brought to Britain, however it's came to Britain, and that's just me appreciating it.
Right.
I think for me it comes from exploiting it without giving any acknowledgement to the culture that it comes from, I think.
I feel that like doesn't there have to be a degree I hesitate to use the word, but like a degree of sacredness or tradition to the culture in the first place in order for it to be appropriated. Like there are certain things which is like it's just like free game to like go ahead and do. For instance, like you're saying, like eating food of a different culture, like that's just like understood and accepted. That's because these people, the origin of this food, it doesn't have traditions that go back certain years that were like carried out by certain roles or like they have this type of significance. So it's fair. It's like appreciating a different culture because you are taking part in it and enjoying it. But like it's when we start talking about like like a celebrity wearing like fucking ceremonial garb of an African tribe.
Yeah.
I was like, that's the type of thing where I feel that, because for the people that still practice this culture, you are an outsider to them, and you do not deserve to be wearing or doing or taking part in this activity that for them is culturally exclusive.
We can draw a really strong parallel that's really close to home for us in this example, and it's something that I never really thought about until till recently, I would say, and that is that a lot of people around the world wear tartan,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's I'd never looked at cultural appropriation and felt slighted by it before. But then I thought about tartan and I was like, that's a bit of a fashion statement now. And
Uh-huh.
tartan's got like serious historical significance for Scotland, especially
Yeah.
like so you probably are aware, but towards like the end when the Jacobite rebellion was like squashed towards the end of the 17th century, the 18th century, sorry, tartan was banned in Scotland because it
Mm.
was seen as like a statement of like we're against the British.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there was a while where Scottish people weren't allowed to wear tartan, and it was like
yeah.
that's like a ceremonial garb
That was
for us, right?
colonialism back then. That was
Yes.
inappropriate quelching of culture. So I guess that's a good point right there. Like when I was talking about this idea of culture being sacred for it to matter, like tartan is something that legitimately our ancestors in Scotland have fought and died for. But
Hmm.
so I agree with you, and that makes a lot of sense. I'm like
So
thinking to myself,
when we
shit,
talk about like I don't know Gucci or
ah,
what
Burberry,
when they do tartan and they sell
yeah.
it all the way across the world and people buy it in America, how does that make you feel?
Well, that's what I was just about to say. I understand what you're coming from in terms of like how you can view that as appropriation, but I am only proud when I see that, because it's like they might not even know that that's tartan, but I know it's tartan, and that's something uniquely Scottish that we've spread around the world and the world likes. That's like something that's ours and the world likes it.
Mm.
There's I've never before felt like those fucking bastards don't know what the hell they're doing. Even like people like in America, there's like a big thing how like everyone in America has like either like Irish or Scottish or Welsh ancestry. Like they've always got like a second cousin that's from this there or whatever, and like that's just. I think that's cool. It's like people that are just like want to associate with your country. Is that not something that you can see a degree of pride in?
I, I don't necessarily look at people that wear tartan and feel proud that it's Scottish. I don't.
No.
Now I'm coming back. I'm coming back around though.
Oh, yeah.
I
Okay.
don't. I don't necessarily look at other people that are wearing tartan that have no relation to Scotland and feel proud that it's there. Um, it doesn't. Now having thought about it as well, it also doesn't annoy me that they are wearing it because it's different from when I wear it. It's not.
Hmm.
It's not the same. If somebody from I don't know France, for example, who had French ancestors and their roots were totally in France, if or
Yeah.
maybe let's say I don't know Pakistan, someone from
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Pakistan who's totally removed from tartan, has rooted there, and their ancestor line goes back there, and they wear tartan. That's not the same as when I wear tartan. When I put on a kilt, it is a
It's
point
for a
of pride.
reason. Exactly.
It's this
Yeah.
this is my country's garb. I'm proud of this. But when someone else wears it, it doesn't have that significance anymore. And it
Hmm.
doesn't really matter. And I don't care about it because it doesn't have any meaning to you. It's just a fashion statement. So it doesn't mean anything. But when I put it on, it's like an extreme point of pride for
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
So in a way, I almost don't understand why people look at other people wearing items of their cultural significance and be like, "Oh, that's offensive." It's like because that's not the context in which they're wearing it. You know what I mean? They're just wearing it because it's cool, and you
Yeah.
you can't like own fashion, can you? You can't own like patterns or
Uh, you certainly can. But
what you
but
mean
but
like I didn't I mean like patterns. I mean like shapes, like a sequence of shapes. Can you own that?
I think an episode in itself could be copyright law, because I think you might be surprised of what you can officially own. Like people can own certain sounds, like it's crazy. But like, it's not a patent thing. But I agree with you. But at the same time, I totally understand why someone would be offended. Just because like you're saying that it's different for when you wear it to when you see someone else wear it, and like I get that and I agree with you. But can still understand how someone would be offended, because like we're talking about tartan, and that's something that is like quite widely well, distributed around the world. And it's kind of like a bit of a fad. But I'm imagining like a fucking like obscure one, because we're talking, because as well, Scotland, we're, as much as we're not minority, we're not the majority. We're still like a relatively big, influential country. Imagine like people wearing like the outfits of Tibetan monks just to fuck around in because they saw it in like Kung Fu Panda or something like that. Like, I can understand how that could be offensive, especially if those people that are wearing it are then like going around and acting like a bunch of fucking morons, like going out for a night out and dressing up as a cultural or religious group. Because you're right, like it is different. Like the monks that wake up in the morning and don their clothes, they're doing it for their reasons and their culture and their heritage and their understanding. But surely you can still look at someone else doing it and think that they're degrading it, right?
I guess so. Do you feel that people that wear tartan around the world are degrading that?
That's the thing. That's the thing. I agree with how you think. I'm saying that I don't. I appreciate the difference between me taking part in my culture and someone else taking part in it, and how there's a difference there. But I am also saying that I can understand how someone else might be upset, particularly because like we're talking about tartan, and it's not. It's part of our culture, sure, but it's not like super. It's not like, how do I describe this? It's not like a fucking ceremonial garb. You know what? It is a ceremonial garb because folk wear it at weddings and stuff. I don't know. I just feel that tartan might not be the best example here. I'm because like, see, when I'm imagining cultural appropriation, I'm imagining like the big, fucking tiki masks that they wear in like Hawaii, or like
Yeah.
and like, or like African tribes and that type of thing. These things that were like closely related to like religion as well, and like the culture and tradition, basically tradition. I can understand how that being misused or frivolously used could offend people, and I don't see that with tartan. I'll be honest with you, but I can imagine it for other aspects. So, for instance, like someone wearing a Jewish cap. I can't remember what they're called.
No, no,
Sin?
no.
No, I don't remember what they're called. But like,
I've got yarmulke in my mind, but that might be something completely different.
I mean, that sounds like a word I know, so you're probably right. But I can understand how someone would be annoyed at a non-Jewish person wearing one of those for a laugh, right?
Mm.
That's a bit more severe than tartan.
Yeah, I guess so. But does it mean that they shouldn't be allowed to wear hats like that?
Yeah, that's a difficult thing. I think we're realizing already that the thing about cultural appropriation is that so much of this is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? There's no, like, you and I come from the same background, we have the same culture, and we disagree on the perceptions of other people using that culture.
No, you know what? Now that you've said that, though, I think maybe the line is not drawn in a particular region of appropriating something. Maybe the line is different depending on how sacred the thing that you're appropriating is. That's
Right.
maybe a good way to phrase it.
Yeah.
So let's put it in this context now. Kendall Jenner has started this tequila company,
Hmm.
and she's got backlash because the ads for this campaign showed her. I've got a picture on screen just now, and she's like really tanned, like sort of like
Hmm.
really dark skin in the ad campaign. She's wearing a sombrero, like hanging around it. It's like hanging around her neck. She's got like plaited hair, and she's like guiding a horse as well, and she's like going through like a field sort
Okay,
of
so
thing.
she's like dressed to look Latino and acting like someone.
I guess culturally she's dressed and like look. I guess that's what. I'm not even sure if that's how they do dress or if that's just what the perception of them is
Exactly,
to be.
exactly,
I'm
yeah.
not even sure about that.
Hmm.
But people are saying that she's culturally appropriating Mexico basically to make money. She's shelling out to make money with this tequila company. What do you think about that?
Hmm. I This is a thing, like, I think we've kind of made a great truth, and that was that in order for this to be offensive, there has to be a degree of sacredness to it, and what we're talking about here, we're talking about like what they wear, we're talking about like hairstyles. These things aren't these things aren't important to people, like these aren't like, it's not like Mexico has this fucking behind bars, and if you do that you must be Mexican. It's like, this, to me, if it wasn't for an advert, would clearly be a case of appreciation. Because this is an advert, this just seems like an obvious move to try and appeal either to a certain audience or to have closer associations with a particular company to sell the brand. You know, it would be like it would be, in fact, here's one for you. If they were selling a whiskey and Kendall Jenner was sitting there with a kilt on in the Scottish Highlands, like, and the wind's blowing through her hair type of thing,
Mm,
would that annoy you? I think I might be annoyed, but I'll be honest with you.
I don't think so. I think it would depend on the manner in which she was doing this. So, for example, in this scenario, as far as I'm aware, she's the active ingredient for tequila is like grown in a specific area of Mexico, and it's grown in these fields, and it takes like I think it's like 6 to 8 years to mature in these fields,
Okay,
and then it's exported all over the world when it becomes tequila or whatever.
sure.
So I think she's still doing that. It's not like she's making it somewhere else. Like I think it's just being exported, and she's using her brand to sell it
Yeah.
across America.
Mhm.
So I think one of the questions I have is like, to what extent is this exploiting the culture? Because her claim is that she's appreciating the culture, but then she's also making money. And that's where I think the line
Mm,
starts to get a little bit fuzzy and questions start to get raised about what you're doing. Because she's growing the ingredients in Mexico. She obviously has Mexican workers. If it was there, you'd like to hope that it's being
mhm.
grown by Mexican farmers, and that she's getting the ingredients and she's paying for that from them, and then she's exporting that to the US, and then
Yeah.
she's then using her brand to go and sell that on. Is that benefiting them? Because if they're getting all this work, her brand will undoubtedly sell
Yeah.
millions upon millions upon millions of dollars worth
Sure.
of merchandise. So is she just appreciating it, and she's put her name to a brand here that's sort of almost enhancing awareness
Mm.
of Mexican culture? I think it has a bit to do with how it's branded. She can't just say, "Oh, tequila by Kendall Jenner" sort of thing. She has to be like, "Oh, tequila like homegrown in Mexico," like educate almost. If she was to educate while she was like doing it, and these ad campaigns are in Mexico and stuff like that, I think that could also be good in a way, no? So I'd be looking at her if she's like coming to Scotland and she was to do this there. She was to put on like a sort of a tartan skirt or whatever, and she was to come and she was to see whiskey bonds or whatever, and then she was to take that over to America and she was to try and sell that over there. I don't think I'd be too annoyed about that. I'd be like, that's it. That would benefit Scotland, surely. That would get trade going through Scotland, right? That would benefit the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah, it would. It would. And also, first thing to mention is like, I would be willing to bet that in order to sell tequila and to name your product tequila, you will need to make it in a certain region
Well,
in Mexico.
yeah,
It'll be like
that was
champagne.
what I was saying. I think the active
Mhm.
ingredient is grown somewhere.
Yeah.
I can't remember
Mhm.
the name of the place off the top of my head. I think it's
So
Jalisco or something like that. But it has to be grown there. Yeah.
yeah, so you're right that it will have a positive effect on the country because it will employ people and keep them in jobs
Hmm.
selling these. So I get that, but don't you feel that just like the whole, going to another country and wearing their garb and stuff like that, don't you feel there's a level of disingenuousness to that? Like, like, and like I actually hadn't thought this until it's very different thinking about this in terms of the Scottish scenario. It's because like I have a much more I can imagine that much more when I'm thinking of like the Mexican one. I'm like, yeah, I kind of get it, selling tequila type of thing, and just like associating with an image. But like I kind of feel that if she came over to Scotland and like got kitted up with the Scottish things and went to fucking like Highland Games and that type of thing, that it would feel to me like a publicity move or just like like this this isn't really a cultural appreciation. This is your marketing department telling you what to do, and like she does not have an awareness of why she's doing this. Like, um, I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards this action might actually be in. No one's offended, but I can see how there could be perceived insensitivity
I
there.
think people are offended. She's
Oh, well,
she
okay.
she's got a lot of backlash on Instagram over this, and she's actually, and hold on to your seat, Lewis, but she's had to disable the comments on the Instagram post. It's
Wow,
it's that bad. She's
wow.
disabled the comments.
That's a pretty
Biggest,
drastic
one of
move.
the biggest scandals of the year so far.
Yeah. Well, you know what, man? I can understand it, to be honest with you. It's because for me, I think this is just like cheap marketing. You know, it was like when Coca-Cola, when during the bunch of riots we had a couple years ago, they
Oh
like
yeah, that one was
you,
awful.
yeah, like, and it was another Kardashian, I feel.
It was her. It was her.
It was her as well. Yeah,
It
that's what I'm
was her.
fucking saying. Like, yeah, and she was like pretending like that was a form of cultural appropriation. I think it's because that was just clearly a brand taking part in a cultural phenomenon in order to sell things. That inherently lacks an appreciation of the culture to me. You know, and like we're talking about being culturally aware and understanding the values and where these come from. A business using this to sell more units seems like the most pessimistic, unappreciative version of cultural appropriation I can imagine.
Right. So we're talking about like selling things from other cultures then. And I guess technically Mexico owns the rights to tequila because you have to grow it in Mexico. Whether or not legally you can call something tequila or
It'll be
not,
patented. It'll be
I'm not.
patented.
You
Yeah.
think so?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Because it'll be like whiskey. You can't make whiskey. You can make the exact same. You can use the exact same ingredients to make whiskey. You can use the exact same distillery,
Mm,
but if it's not in Scotland, it's called Scotch. It's
Scotch.
not called whiskey. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So do you think Mexico must have then approved this, right?
Yeah. Well, I can imagine that Mexico will see this as a boon. It's because you're right. As much as I'm saying that, I think this is maybe a somewhat heavy-handed use of culture. At the end of the day, this does spread Mexico's culture. You know, like this will be like Mexico's tourism department will be like, "Holy shit, we've got Kendall Jenner selling tequila." You know, that's from a government perspective, they will. I imagine they would have been absolutely overjoyed when they heard that Kendall's going to be opening up a brand of tequila.
So if Mexico are saying that though, and they're
Hmm.
quite happy for her to do that, is it still cultural appropriation and is it not
Mm.
cultural assimilation then, where Kendall Jenner is the culture of California, of America, like the Kardashians are a big cultural thing in America. Tequila is a massive cultural thing for Mexico, and now they're neighboring countries,
Mm.
so she's linked up with them. Is this not some sort of assimilation as opposed to appropriation? You know, some people are clearly angry about it because it's had so much backlash. I wonder how many of those people are like Americans that have like.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm wondering how many Mexicans are really offended by this. I think I've seen there's a
Well,
few responses that I've seen that were angry about it, but I'm wondering what they think about it as a nation.
well, I would argue that it's not your nation. No, sorry, it's not your ruling body that decides on your culture. You know, like Mexico,
No.
they aren't the ones that decide about whether this is an appropriate use of culture. It's the citizens. You know, it's a
Mm-hmm.
collective decision. So
Right.
I don't think we can. I don't just because Mexico was given the go ahead doesn't mean we can excuse this because it really does come down to the reaction of the people. And even if these people are uninformed about what culture appropriation actually is, it's still what they think, you know? So we can't really, you can't tell a nation they're wrong to feel a certain way. They feel that way. We just need to understand why they are doing that and whether it really is cultural appropriation or something else. So I guess I'm kind of like, I do imagine that most Mexican people are not overly concerned about this, and I'm convinced that the Mexican government is overjoyed without this. But I understand why there might be people that are calling her out. But I really want to make it clear, actually, that I'm like, I think it's stupid. You know, like I think at the end of the day, I think most of I wouldn't be the type of person that would be complaining about this. Look at it that way. But I think I can understand the perspective of the people that do.
So, do you, at the end of the day, think that she should be allowed to do this or not? Is it because if
Mm,
we're talking about cultural appropriation, we're talking about something that's inherently bad and that we
yeah.
shouldn't be doing. Now, I
Hmm.
listed examples earlier, for example, Halloween costumes, blackface.
Yeah.
These are things that I think are insensitive, they're inappropriate adaptations of culture, and it's kind of like you shouldn't be doing those things. So, we're saying that there is a line somewhere. There are things that you shouldn't be doing when it comes to
Hmm.
culture.
Hmm.
Is this one of the things that we're saying that she shouldn't be doing, because
Mm.
I kind of get it now that you've now that we're relating it to like tartan. This is actually quite a good example for us, because we actually
Right.
do have, as Scottish people, we're quite a proud nation. We have like tartan and we have whiskey. We have two things that we can closely relate to this issue
Right.
actually.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm kind of understanding what you're saying now. Is like, if she came over to Scotland and she slapped her name on a bottle of, well, the to be fair, the bottle of tequila, I don't think it's not like Kendall
It
Jenner
won't say.
tequila.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
she's
Yeah.
she's part of the brand, I guess. I guess she maybe owns it, or she partially owns it, or
Yeah.
something like that.
It'll be a collaboration of some
If
kind.
she was to do like a collaboration for whiskey in Scotland, I'm like, would I be annoyed? Maybe. Do I
Hmm.
think that she shouldn't be able to do it? Probably not. I mean, when we talk about whiskey and stuff like that, it has to be brewed in Scotland for it to be whiskey. Fair enough. That's something that we have, and that's something that Mexico has with tequila.
Hmm.
But once it is brewed here, the method of like getting it out is only good for us, right? As a nation, it's only good
Yeah.
to
It's an
get
export,
to
isn't
get
it? Yeah.
that export, that trade.
Hmm.
And for someone to like Kendall Jenner to come along and be like, I fucking love tequila. I'm gonna go in on this, I'm gonna slap my name to it, and I'm gonna make you guys a shit ton of money. I'll make some money in the process, sure.
A
But
lot. Yeah.
everything I do makes fucking money. So what does it
Yeah.
matter?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. What I touch turns to gold.
exactly. Like, if Kendall Jenner was to be like, I want to be involved in this whiskey project, I'd be like, like, okay, like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
that could be a really good thing, you know.
And Nikki Sturgeon would be over the fucking moon, you know.
They could be shaking hands, Nikki Sturgeon, Kendall Jenner on the
My
front of
close friend Kendall Jenner. Yeah.
on the front of the bottle. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That'd be hilarious,
that would be
actually.
hilarious. Yeah. Uh, to answer that, like I think that this is the type of thing that should 100% be allowed, you know, but you just have to accept the consequences of your action if you do deal with it insensitively. You know, like it's like we said, at the end of the day, the people that decide on this is appropriate or not are the culture that you're representing. It will be the Mexican people. Whether you piss them off and they decide to boycott the product, it's like that was your fault for handling this the wrong way. Should you be allowed to do it? Of course you should be allowed to do it. You know, I totally think that that's fine. It's just that be aware of what you're doing.
I think a part of the problem might be, though, that the Mexican people might boycott it, but the tequila will be sold all across America.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if the Americans adapt to it, they're not going to give a fuck what
no.
the Mexicans see if they're making enough money. You know, that's where the issue lies there, and I suppose.
Hmm.
Um,
Or you know, like uh, you're right. Actually, I think that regardless of how many people speak out against this, it's probably going to sell like fucking like you wouldn't believe. You know, I think it's going to do
yeah.
extremely well and sell for an exorbitant amount as well. But you know, just fucking take the hit of those people that do boycott you because they believe that you handled it insensitively. Like that's fine, and they are entitled to that opinion because that's kind of what we said earlier. Like what we're talking about here, the whole concept of cultural appropriation, I think is very individualistic. As much as we're talking about the decisions of a people and a nation, it's still like you're the one that makes a personal stand about what you think is people using your own culture in an appropriate way. So that's if like certain individuals think that's fine. That's the way it should be, right?
Yeah, the concern for me is if it comes down to if the people of Mexico think this is offensive,
Mm-hmm.
and but Americans still buy it anyway and they still make
Nothing,
money
right?
hand over fist, then I can see how cultural appropriation becomes colonization, because they've just seen that culture. They've been like, see that? We're having it now. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
it's grown in your country, but we're still going to take it, you know,
yeah.
and we're going to do
That
whatever the
is
fuck we want with it.
exploitation. Yeah, that exactly is exploitation because they're making money off of people that are not happy within their culture using a certain way. That to me does match up with what we're talking about and how I can definitely see how that type of cultural appropriation is synonymous with colonization.
Although, I mean, I can't imagine how much power the cancel culture engine has to have to cancel the Kardashians.
Yeah, it no, I don't think it has enough. They could piss off everyone in the Western world, and I think they'd still keep fucking making money however they make it.
Yeah,
I don't even know,
exactly.
you know.
So they must have like such a big following in America. These guys are untouchable now. You know, the
Yeah,
Kardashians are
yeah.
probably just on a different level of like fame and money. They can't be stopped now.
I think that they could earn, like, they could stop earning money tomorrow and they would still be earning millions every year off of interest. You know, like, these
Yeah.
guys are loaded beyond imagination. Like, I think that it's hard. Yeah, like we're we're talking about like this cultural appropriation. Do you think Kendall Jenner gives a flying fuck about
she
these fucking folk that are on fucking her Instagram? You
she
know,
just went onto her Instagram and went, disable the fucking comments. I couldn't give a fuck.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or just disable them for the next 2 days, and by then they'll have forgotten. You know.
Yeah, that is the kind of thing that makes me think it is like colonization, though, where
Right.
I suppose if they do get a lot of backlash for this, though, the brand itself might see, a negative impact on the sales compared to what it would have. So the
Hmm.
backlash that they'll get from, there are undoubtedly people in America that will boycott the product because they think it is cultural appropriation and they will actively avoid it.
Hmm.
So if the people of Mexico are offended by this, and you'd like to hope that the people of America would turn around and say, like, you probably shouldn't be doing this. Like, you can't be doing this if it's like appropriating this country. I'm just not sure to what extent that's going to happen, especially because
Mm.
they're Kardashians.
Yeah, and also I imagine the people that buy premium tequila, like, many, like $100 a fucking bottle, are not the type of people that think about cultural appropriation.
God, I never even thought about how much this bottle of tequila is going to cost.
Oh, yeah, I imagine it's like, yeah,
Jesus Christ.
premium, man.
Yeah, it's going to be like $150 or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I think we've almost like dropped at two different points on how we feel about this, but the only thing is, I think you're right in the sense that she should be allowed to do this. I can't see how can you make this sort of thing illegal. I don't think you
No,
can. Can
yeah,
you? I don't think you can. And ultimately, since like you can't make any of these things illegal, it kind of comes back to the same thing that I feel like I'm always saying. That's, vote with your wallet and let
exactly.
let,
Yeah, the
let the
market will dictate
let
this.
the
Yeah.
market speak. If you think
Hmm.
this is bad, then don't buy it, and tell people that you think it's bad as well. But I guess you can't judge someone for not buying it because they don't think it's offensive. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, people are, I think there's a degree of justification in perceiving offense, but specifically because we're talking about a business and like selling culture, I understand it purely in that regard, but do I think that the fuss that's been caused over this will have any effect on the bottom line? I really not convinced. I think it'll be a wildly successful product regardless.
I think it will be wildly successful, but I think how they address the cultural appropriation issue will affect the bottom line. Eventually, some way, in shape, or form, it will affect the bottom line. I guess we don't know how much, and it will still be a wildly successful product anyway. So
Yeah, yeah. I imagine even if this thing doesn't affect the bottom dollar to like the bottom line to a huge extent, it will still affect the reputation of the brand and the company itself that they would think about this next time they do an advertisement campaign.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Episode 11 in the books.
Yep.
Good episode. We seem to be going down this cancel culture arc. We lined up topics nicely this week, despite not having really discussed them beforehand, which was
Yeah, yeah, there was kind of tangential relations there, wasn't there? That was quite good. They tied in quite well. I was really glad you ended up talking about culture appropriation there. It's because I swear to you, man, I've never thought about it in any degree of depth before in my life.
I'd only seen it in like Twitter and some of the
Mm.
spheres, and people were like, "This is cultural appropriation," and I'm like, "What the fuck is that?" Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I honestly have no clue what that is, but it seems to be something that keeps coming up, and I think it's a good thing to think about because I think culture is extremely important to people. I would never want to see tartan die out. I would
Yeah,
never I
yeah.
would never want to see that go away. I would never want that to be mixed in with somebody else's culture. I always
Hmm.
want it to have its place.
Hmm.
And I think tartan is sort of significant enough that it will. And I think tequila is as well, where
Right.
it'll be around forever. It's just maybe the ways in which people make money with it um, have something to be desired when it comes to appropriating cultures that maybe you shouldn't be.